We've been in brat summer and then demure summer, and now are we entering hot labor fall? Like, is that what's happening?
I mean, I'm down to clown.
Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals Labor Edition. Power to the people. I'm your host, Eric Morgan.
I'm Evan Davis. This is an historic occasion.
And historic indeed.
Because the NWSL has signed a new CBA more than 2 years ahead of schedule that's going to take labor peace through the end of the 2030 season that, for the first time in an American top-flight sports league, all freedom of player movement is guaranteed.
Yeah, it's nuts.
This is extraordinary. I mean, there are so many details to break down that started getting leaked on Wednesday night that were confirmed Thursday morning when we're recording this, when the Players Association officially announced their fact sheet, kind of hitting all of the big points. We don't have the full details of the CBA just yet, but we do have a lot of information that we can talk about. And there are things actually maybe to discuss about, like what the players maybe had to give up to ensure that this deal was guaranteed. But this is, I don't know if I have felt better or more optimistic about the long-term health of the NWSL than I have this morning, to be honest.
I'll accept your enthusiasm, and I certainly think it's a great deal for the Players Union for the next 3 years. I think because of what happens with the media rights change, I think it's potentially leaving a lot of money on the table for players eventually. But such is the nature of unions, solving the problem for the workers immediately at the cost of something in the future is the concession that often happens with ownership. But I think for the health of the league, I think everybody won here, basically, as opposed to just the players winning.
I think that's in the long term true, and we're going to get into all the specifics, but I think it's important to put this in the context of where the stage of labor power is in the league relative to its age, which I think
that's fair.
Maybe has become entrenched at a faster pace than maybe any other sports league in history, especially when you consider that, free agency didn't exist in major men's professional sports until 50 years ago. And I think we'll talk about some of the details that I think maybe puts some guardrails on ownership's ability to kind of like crush the union's power when the new media rights deal is signed in 2028, which is the thing that drove the negotiations for this deal in the first place. That they happened at all, that the deal got signed 2.5 years ahead of schedule. It all comes down to the fact that a new media rights deal is going to be signed in the 27-28 offseason.
Everyone is banking on the scale and scope of the future media rights deal to determine how the back end of this deal ends up working out.
Again, we'll talk about revenue sharing, and we're going to talk about obligatory audits of the league's books by the union and how that affects how large a piece of the pie the owners group gets to keep from when that rights deal is signed in 3.5 years. So why don't we start and just go back and forth about what we think might be the most consequential pieces of this, particularly for players, because on the surface, the players got a lot here.
Yeah, totally. Do you want to kick us off?
I mean, I think the first thing to talk about, which is what broke last night, which I certainly didn't think was necessarily going to be implemented immediately, but is the draft is no more, folks, and that includes the expansion draft, which is pretty significant given Boston and another team's entry into the league in 18 months' time. There, for the first time ever, a top-flight professional sports league in the United States is not beholden to an entry draft for its player pool. This is massive.
Yeah, I agree with that. I said to you off air, and I'll repeat it here. The not throwing of a party is a lot less work than the throwing of a party. And so as far as the league is concerned, not holding a draft is not actually that big a deal. It's weird to now know that I attended the last NWSL draft.
I know.
But that event was not particularly entertaining, so I don't regret not attending a future one. That said, I think this just gets in line, even more so than MLS is, with the rest of the way the world operates in terms of soccer. Our college system is super ineffective as far as the development of talent is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
And I have long been on the record, like, I get that people like college sports in America, but I don't think it makes any sense for those who are attempting a professional career. I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
You give away your labor, even with the changes that have happened very recently in the way in which high-profile college athletes can use their likeness and image to make money. I think that from a developmental position, spending 4 or 5 months a year in your season between the ages of 18 to 22 is just really not how you should be developing as a player.
It's too short. It's too little time.
It's too little time, and really won't keep the U.S. up with the rest of the world. If you're, hey, Olivia Moultrie, if you want to start playing, 11 months a year at age 15, and you're good enough, please come. We'll figure it out.
Right.
And I do think that good players will still come through the college system. It happens, but I think it will be rarer. And I think that that's, generally speaking, really good for the health of the player pool in the league.
Yeah,
and the health of U.S. women's soccer.
I think the owners knew that they really did not have a lot of leverage here for the points that you just made over the last 3, 4, 5 years of more and more players either leaving college early, bypassing college for Europe, or starting their professional careers before they've even left high school. And now, with the addition of the USL Super League, which granted is not attracting like top-tier talent, it is providing another professional avenue, because that league doesn't have a draft either, for players who might have gotten picked in the lower rounds to find other professional opportunities outside of either late seasons in college or having to be forced to go through the draft in the first place. And it's important to remember, like, the draft is an anti-labor tool. It is there to artificially suppress player salaries by forcing them to not have full freedom of movement to choose which teams they want to sign with.
Yeah.
So
by funneling them to potentially very poorly run teams who are capitalizing on labor cost controls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's been a little bit of concern about what happens with some of those players who might have been selected in the lower rounds. Like, what happens to their careers when they don't have the opportunity to go to the NWSL via the draft after 4 years of college. But I broke down the average amount of playing time weighted by the percentage of available seasons you actually played in by pick slot. And it's more or less as you expect. Like, the most amount of playing time is the number 1 pick, number 2, 3, 4. They're all, it's all a fairly linear approach. And then you get down to 3rd and 4th round picks. Like, the 32nd pick, on average, since the 2020 draft, averages this weighted minutes per season of 0 minutes. These players aren't making it to the NWSL anyway, and certainly not to build a long-term career. So now with the USL Super League, Liga MX Femenil, potentially lower leagues in Europe available to you, that creates all this extra pressure and competition for talent. And we just saw Simi Awujo sign for Manchester United. We've seen so many players who would have been top 5 picks in years past just not even bother with the NWSL at all. So how can the NWSL maintain talent if they keep insisting on 4 years of college and a draft? This was inevitable. I'm just blown away that it happened so fast.
Again, I'm not. This is like reasonable parties sitting down and agreeing that this thing is broken. The Players Association has no incentive to protect the college draft
no
whatsoever.
Of course not.
There's one side of the negotiating piece, and the other side, the owners have seen are looking to maximize the talent that they roster and that they pay as quickly as possible. The fact that other leagues in the U.S. haven't just done away with this speaks to like how entrenched they are. And what is exciting about the NWSL is that it isn't entrenched in this way and this kind of thinking.
Well, I'll push back on this just a little bit to say that there is still such a low amount of absolute investment required to be competitive
Yeah.
in the NWSL that the salary suppressing effects of the draft relative to
Negligible.
their effects, say like in the NBA or the NFL, are a lot smaller. Like the owners in the NFL and the NBA are just as greedy and just as capitalistic, if not more so, and are much more anti-labor. But they have, if you look at it from their perspective, a lot more money to lose relative to the NWSL if the
Totally.
draft were eliminated. So it's in their interest, it's in their financial interest to keep those going.
But also, most American sports, baseball, football, to a lesser extent basketball, just don't have international pressure, other leagues where players can go. As a soccer player, you have all of Europe, Liga MX Femenil, and not waste these crucial development years for yourself, but also get paid to play.
Right.
I think we could go, this is a completely different segue, but like the myth of the value of American college, the NWSL is essentially agreeing that like we just don't want to lose out on best players. And so what I think that means is we no longer use this antiquated system to develop them.
Yeah.
And we use team control. Now, the real question will be about how NWSL clubs invest and develop, whether we start seeing like a robust academy system.
Yeah.
Like a lot of that has yet to be figured out.
Yeah. And it's
my guess is that will get figured out.
Yeah, but it's not a thing that can happen overnight. A lot of teams are not going to be able to spool up robust academies immediately. So that is something that maybe the NWSL, or rather the NCAA, can use to their advantage, at least in the short term. I saw this idea pitched recently that the NCAA teams with really strong reputations for developing players could potentially use that as a selling point for players who might not be ready to go pro at 18 or 19, and can sell that to the NWSL, being like, you can sign players out of our program in 3 or 4 years, and they will be professional grade. And that might be a way to try and entice players who are not pro ready to stay in the NCAA. And that's honestly the only piece of leverage the NCAA is going to be able to have, because unlike basketball or men's football, NIL is not going to keep women's soccer players inside the college system, because the money just isn't there in the same way as it is with basketball and gridiron.
That's right. Also, there's just limited sense in if your goal is to become a professional soccer player, I don't know why you're taking 1,000-person Bio 101 seminar. Like I just don't understand why you're filling core requirements and living in a dorm. If your goal is to become a professional, like it's just a different avenue.
Yeah.
I don't think college sports will go away. Right now, the best college soccer players have all been like, fuck this.
Yeah.
Get me out of here as fast as possible and get me paid for this stuff. And that inclination is correct. So I'm not surprised that the college draft went away immediately. I think it's awesome that it did. I think it's an inevitability. Against the American sports landscape, the eradication of the draft is massive.
Yeah.
As far as like the most crucial parts of this deal, for me, probably not. I think it always comes back to just like the money. But we should talk about the money now.
The elimination of the draft guarantees players more money, though. You know?
Correct. But like I look to the league's base salary jumping.
Yeah, I mean, minimum salary for 2023 was just shy of $40K, and by 2030 it will be at $82.5K, going up to $48.5 in 2025. Yeah,
essentially doubling the base pay in the league.
Yeah,
that's where I'm like, good. That's a labor win.
Massive labor win. And also when you pair it with cost of living adjustments that are now obligatory, which they weren't in the past.
Yeah. Like for your entry-level player, I'll tell you this, no college athlete is making $83K playing women's college soccer.
Nope.
With their image and likeness.
Nope.
And getting cost of living adjustments associated with that.
Yeah.
I think the absence of a maximum salary is great. I think the bigger deal we're seeing a quick increase in the salary cap, which is incredibly healthy for the league. But my reservation, and maybe this is where you push back, is I think common among sports leagues, the cap increases each year. But I feel like the jump that we've seen in the last 2 years has been great for the health of the league. And this next jump to 3.3 million for next year is great. But I'm less confident in that $5.1 million salary cap in 2030
Yeah,
being good.
I
Push back,
well,
please.
no, but I mean, I understand it. We know how cost of living has outpaced wage growth in pretty much every business sector in the United States over the last 40 years, actually longer than that. So is just shy of doubling the salary cap over the next 7 years good enough? Maybe not. I think combining it with the cost of living adjustments that teams are now required to provide helps mitigate that to a certain degree. Not all the way, but it does mitigate it to a certain degree. I'm looking at Front Office Sports, which has a little bit more data on the financials than maybe some of the other reporting we've seen. And, 2024, the average NWSL salary is $56K a year. By 2030, that's expected to be somewhere between $200,000 and $240,000 a year. The average salary. That's significant. As for whatever qualms we might have regarding the total team per team salary cap, to have your average player salary increase by a multiple of 5 feels big to me, and maybe I'm not thinking about it in the right economic terms, but that sounds important. And then to also maybe back your point up a little bit but soften it is that the players were going to have to give something up somewhere because the league and the owners wanted this negotiation to happen now, way ahead of schedule, because they know that their media rights deal is up at the end of 2027, and I think that they sense it's going to be a massive financial windfall for anyone who owns a piece of an NWSL team. So they wanted to ensure labor peace and fixed costs when that deal comes up so that the players could negotiate a larger piece of that revenue pie.
I think the way they did it was buying off the players now on some level for later.
But let me check.
Which is fair.
But I don't like the phrase buying them off, because what the players are winning, again, as we said at the top of the show, has to be put in the context of what this league was as recently as 3 years ago, where this league is in its history relative to other leagues when they start making massive labor wins. Like, for a league to exist for 11 years and for players to have this amount of both financial and player movement protection is unprecedented. Yes, you had to give up a payday down the line, and I think you also had to sacrifice raw money from a salary cap perspective. That's obvious. This was a gamble. The players had to make a gamble here. Do you
totally
sweat it out until the end of 2026 and really try to make some serious money, or do you try to ensure that your members and your future members between now and the end of 2026 have more workplace protections, have more lifestyle and lifestyle comfort protections in the form of minimum salary, in the form of cost of living, et cetera, and so forth. $20,000 guaranteed to increase maternity funding, like egg freezing. That's something that we often have to remember is important to women's players that does not factor into the men's game. I want to make sure that I actually get the values right. Yeah, I mean, the stipend for childcare, or getting caretakers for children under 5 on road trips, that potentially can double. The league is introducing $20,000 for family planning, like IVF, fertility treatments, egg freezing. Players are guaranteed a mid-season break of at least 28 days in between seasons.
Again, I don't disagree with any of this,
But what I'm
But I
saying is,
think-
like, this feels like it's necessary to try and get in place in order to build on future wins down the road.
Totally.
And that's why I don't like the phrase buying them off. I think you look at the MLB.
By the way-
the MLB CBA negotiations in 2016, that was the owners buying off the players with chicken feed. You know, like, ooh, you want like an extra seat between you on bus trips when you do spring training in Florida? Fine, we'll give you that. We're going to fuck you on everything else over the next 5 years. You know, this doesn't feel like chicken feed.
By the way, I'm using the phrase a little more tongue-in-cheek than I think you are reading it. I would happily be bought off by lots of employers I've worked for. I don't think it is buying off is another way of saying getting paid or getting your needs taken care of. That said, I mean, how many players in the league are currently signed past 2027?
Basically none.
Correct. And they're looking out for number one. I think for long-term growth, like all of this is good. And I think it just won't look good when the new media rights deal comes in and it starts with a B in billion as opposed to an M in million. And
are we sure that it's going to start with a B?
If what we've seen with the WNBA, if what we have seen with the ratings for that gold medal match,
yeah,
if what we've seen just generally speaking for TV ratings in general continue, yeah, I think it's going to start with a B billion. And that's where like I just don't love the extra 3 years at the end of that deal for the players, none of whom are signed or guaranteed to be playing in this league at that point, basically.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, that's also deliberate, right?
No,
like,
totally.
I mean,
By the way, totally.
Everyone who's signing in 2028 is going to get a massive pay bump. That's why they don't want extra years guaranteed past 2027.
No, I get that. I would have loved to have seen a more aggressive scaling up one for the players. This is picking a nit. I think everything you've brought up is appropriate. And I think it sort of covers what, like, just in terms of quality of life. We have to remember that in this league, quality of life has not even really been a consideration for the vast majority of this league's existence.
That's the phrase I was looking for earlier. It's like, lifestyle comfort guarantee. No, just quality of life, you dipshit. So something to really emphasize, and I'm actually got the numbers in front of me, which I didn't before. Like, yes, the big owner win here is labor peace when the media rights deal gets signed in 2028. What the players have done is guaranteed that a, quote, performance-based reopen trigger would allow for renegotiations on a lot of these deal points if shareable revenues in 2028 and 2029 surpass $300 million. Media rights falls under the shareable revenue umbrella. And to give you context, in 2023, 12 teams collectively generated about a little over $100 million in revenue. That's in 2023. So we now have 5 years of runway to get to over $300 million in shareable revenue for the renegotiation to trigger. So that means at the end of the 2028 season, we could be back. We could be back at the negotiating table. You know, and players will know that there will be more money to extract from the ownership.
And if you wanted to point to a win, that's a win.
Huge win.
That said, let's talk about the stuff that's going to make the players' quality of life a lot better.
Yeah.
In addition to that, let's talk about charter flights.
Yeah.
Evan, I think both of us are pretty against PJs. That said, who wants to connect through O'Hare to Louisville in October?
Oh, my God.
Or July?
Yeah, absolutely miserable. And just to give you, so basically how this is going to shake out is that every team is able to make 3 round trips every season for charter flights without needing pre-approval. On top of that, they can request and most likely receive approval for additional charter flights if they so choose. And also, on top of all of that, if there is, like, say, if we're reading between the lines, if you're Orlando and you gotta go play Seattle on Wednesday, and basically it becomes a 3-game week where you then have to travel 3,000 miles for a midweek game, that midweek game has to be a charter flight as well.
Yeah.
And that is really, really important to think about when, I think, I don't know if I've ever mentioned this on the show before, but I never quite understood that common player complaint about having to fly a commercial
Oh my God.
flight. But then, as you age, and like I'm not a professional athlete, and I know how sore my body is when after I've traveled 3,000 miles in coach, like I finally began to understand why that's really significant. And then, if you're on a 3-game week and one of those mid-game weeks it requires, maybe more than 1,000 miles one way, I would want to be able to stretch out, as it were. So this is actually really important because this, like, charter flights were never obligatory before.
No, Evan, this is also where our height disparity comes in.
I mean, no 6-foot goalkeeper is happy about flying in first class.
like Casey Murphy, I got you. Like,
right.
I straight up, like, I can't imagine 90 minutes of active diving followed by, I mean, I can, followed by like being jammed into, a coach seat between Raleigh, Durham, and San Diego, which, no direct flight there, guys. Nope. I think it's a big deal. It's just taking care of the physical, like if you've ever like twisted your ankle and gotten on an airplane, you understand that, like, the need to, if you can't elevate that thing, if you don't have space to do that, this is huge in terms of just like player health. I'm not a big fan of PJs, but this is, at least it's tethered to work performance. This isn't a Kardashian flying from Van Nuys to Camarillo.
Right, with only like 10 people on the plane.
Yeah, or 4.
Yeah, exactly.
That little perk is a big one.
Yeah.
Particularly given how bicoastal this league is, how we're, with the addition of Boston, all West Coast major cities have a team, or major metropolitan areas have a team. And then you've got places like Boston, New York, DC, Orlando. Like, these are, the vast majority of teams in this league do not play in the middle of this country. These flights are often very long. And the NWSL is a single table system, which is unique also among American sports leagues.
Yeah. You
do not have, like, exceeding numbers of regional games to mitigate travel pains. You just play like a true schedule you play home and aways against everybody.
Yeah.
Let's talk no trades without player consent.
No trades without player consent, I think, paired with, or triply paired with, universal guaranteed contracts and universal free agency that begins immediately.
Yeah,
or once your current contract ends. This is a massive amount of player power that will, through competition, force more money into the players' pockets.
That's right.
The NFL does not have universal guaranteed contracts. No league has guaranteed. It's what is essentially a no trade clause. Like, you can negotiate that in your contract in other leagues, but it's not necessarily something that is just given to you out of the gate. So much of what the players have had to struggle with on the level of quality of life is teams having the power to either cancel your contract for whatever reason or move you on a dime at the last minute when you're getting paid sub-minimum wage and the cost of moving and the cost of living becomes prohibitive. It's what drove a lot of players out of the league, for many, many years. So things have gotten a lot better on that front, but now for all of those sorts of protections to be baked in means that housing insecurity, living insecurity, and your desire to be able to live where you want and play where you want, work where you want, is super, super important.
Yeah, again, it's huge. In the short term here, you have players who are going to be paid better on the whole, who are going to get to determine where they and their family live with greater control. You're not going to have any I mean, we could just rattle off a list of players who were like, I didn't know I was getting traded. We could probably even do that this week.
Yep.
And along with like cost of living stuff, you just have a lot less unnecessary stress being put on the lifestyle of somebody who plays in this league.
Yeah, and I think it forces teams to be much more considerate and careful about their own asset acquisition. Because between guaranteed free agency and a player approval of all trades, that means you can't just like snap somebody up with the knowledge that you can move them on in order to shuffle the deck for your own needs later on. Like, players going to have to be sold on why they would want to play there.
Best of luck, Louisville.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, Louisville does have
kidding.
that advantage of like creating a pretty good environment for players, which they need, because otherwise, why would you want to play in Louisville?
I suppose the point that I'm getting at is every small market team will need to come up with other decided advantages, and every major market team will need to accommodate, like, will need to understand and accommodate the costs of what they are asking a player to do when they join this team.
That's right. The housing elements, when I first saw that team housing was going to be phased out, my first thought was that this was a concession by the players to the owners, but it actually looks like it's something that the players wanted. That and the part of team housing that I forgot was that players are taxed for living in team housing.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to be allowed to make it optional, and so now they have access to a supplemental housing stipend if they don't want to avail themselves of team housing. And because they wanted a certain cap on the percentage of their income that would go toward rent, and with cost of living being a major part of that, they had a labor economist, a woman named Dr. Beth Paulin, who is an economist at LaSalle University, be part of the negotiating team to figure out what those percentages were going to look like. And so she helped work out how the cost of living adjustment would be applied to every single market, which is an incredibly savvy thing to do. Not every players union, or at least for a long time, had dedicated quants, as it were, hashing all of this stuff out. The MLB Players Union being a famous example that they only just hired a sabermetrician like 4 years ago to be a full-time member of the staff.
Nuts.
Yeah, that really, really makes a huge difference to allow players to feel comfortable about approving a trade from, say, Louisville to Bay FC, for example, where your cost of living is going to skyrocket.
Yeah. Houston to Gotham.
Another
cost of living.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, going up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I suppose, anything else you want to hit here?
Yeah, I think just, to underline, whatever the players gave up, they did build in, at least from what it looks like on the outside, for what little information we have, it looks like they have built in some safeguards to try and claw back some of the money that the new media rights deal is going to bring. That'll help maybe get that salary cap higher. And otherwise, for a league to have only existed for 11 years and to be able to give their players these just sweeping protections to make sure that they can have a high quality of life and not have to worry about where they're going to live, how they're going to live, whether they have to choose to be a player or to be a mother, to ensure that their, women-specific health care is covered and accessible to them without any other insecurities, is just huge. And
absolutely.
like just no league has ever been able to give this kind of stuff to their players so quickly. I think it's a big day for labor, and whatever concerns even left-wing people might have about the elimination of the draft or increasing salaries or increasing financial obligations from teams to players will somehow upset the health of the league. Like, will this swing competitive balance? I think you have to remember that salary caps are a very powerful talent dispersal tool, even without a draft. You know, I do not see. I don't see this league all of a sudden becoming Liga FA.
Yeah, the NWSL. For those of you who like competitive balance out there, a salary cap does that and keeps that. It's fundamental to parity.
Yeah,
it's fundamental.
Teams only get to spend $3.3 million on player salaries next year. Do you really think that all of a sudden, like, Angel City and Gotham can just go and outspend everybody and concentrate all the talent? No, of course not. Especially when the competition for talent is really global. I think that's the other thing. Like, with the elimination of both the draft and the guarantee of salary contracts and universal free agency, you're pulling yourself in alignment, and the union and the league both highlighted this, you're pulling yourself in alignment with FIFA's global transfer standards, which means talent is going to feel less trepidatious about coming here. As for all the advances just this last offseason has made about attracting players from outside of the U.S., this now really will open up the floodgates.
The NWSL players for themselves, the members of the union currently, I think, won a lot of large concessions. All right, anything else you want to hit here on this big hot labor Thursday?
Hot labor autumn. No, just that I'm very, very excited for what the future holds. Yeah, for whatever concerns you may have about what the players may have left on the table, I think there are backstops that they can use to get back in the money hunt. But more importantly, both the league and the owners think that there is money to be made in this league. And that maybe quells some of the wildcatting speculation concerns that I've sometimes had about, is this a bubble market that we're living in right now? If the owners think that they can make a lot of money in 3 or 4 years, I worry about that a little bit less. And also, overspending is still controlled by the salary cap. So it's not like people are just going to start spending themselves into oblivion.
Yeah. Todd Bowley doesn't own an NWSL team.
No risk of administration with any of these clubs.
This is worthy of an emergency pod.
Absolutely.
And I'm glad we did it. It's a cool, lots of permutations coming, but I think generally speaking, the health of women's soccer, and if you're a fan of the NWSL, shit got better today.
Yes, it did. Congratulations to the NWSLPA. Congratulations to Megan Burke for all the work that she and her team put in. Congratulations to Tori Huster, who is the main kind of leader in a lot of these negotiations. Congratulations to all the players who sacrificed some of their Olympics break to get this thing over the line. This is, and some of those players were playing in the Olympics, like Alyssa. Looking at you, Alyssa Nair. This is, you guys did good today. You guys did real good today, and I hope you guys pop a bottle of champagne. But as for us, you'll hear us on our, back to our regular scheduled programming on Tuesday. So thanks for letting us break this all down.
Talk soon. Bye.